Here's what almost every man believes the week his divorce is finalized. I know exactly who I am. I just don't happen to be married anymore. Clean subtraction. Wife minus husband equals still you, just single. It feels obvious. It's also, according to 4 decades of identity research, almost exactly backwards. Meet Mark, 47, married 19 years, 2 kids, one still at home finishing high school. The week the divorce was final, Mark told his brother, "I'm fine, I know who I am." He believed it. Most guys do. 6 weeks later, 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, Mark is standing in the cereal aisle. Not because he's out of cereal, because his brain threw an error he'd never hit before. A question simpler than anything on his old work spreadsheets. What do I actually want for dinner? Not what the family wants, not what she used to make on Thursdays. What does Mark want? He stood there a full minute. Then he left without buying anything. That number, 42%, is going to come back later, and it explains exactly what happened to Mark in that aisle. But first, we need to knock down the misconception sitting underneath it. A sociologist named Peggy Thoits spent years studying something called role identity theory. Plain English version, the average adult juggles about 14 distinct social roles at once. Each one isn't just a label, it's a source of structure, meaning, and, this is the part nobody tells you, psychological stability. Thoits found the number of roles you actively hold directly predicts your mental health. More roles, more resilience. Fewer roles, more distress. It's arithmetic before it's anything else. Divorce is not the loss of a relationship. For a lot of men, it's the loss of the operating system that organized every other part of who they were. Nobody warns you about that part. They warn you about the lawyers. Quick question. If you had to guess which role organizes all the others in a married man's life, which one sits at the top, running the show? What would you say? Most guys answer provider or career. Makes sense. That's where the paycheck comes from. That's where the ego lives. That's the thing you talk about at parties. Reasonable guess? Wrong. Reitzes and Mutran, publishing in Social Psychology Quarterly, measured what they call identity salience. Basically, which roles a man ranks as most central to his sense of self, and how strongly each one predicts his self-esteem day to day. For married men over 40, the spousal role scored more than double the career role. Not close. The job title got the business cards, the marriage got the man. Picture Mark again. 19 years married, VP at a logistics company, the guy who introduces himself at parties by what he does. He'd have told you, without blinking, that his career was his identity. The promotions, the corner office, the LinkedIn headline. That's the story he told himself for 2 decades. Here's why the research says otherwise. Your job gives you feedback maybe once a year at a review. Your marriage gives you feedback constantly. Who you make coffee for, who notices you're quiet, who you complain to about your boss, who reminds you to call your mother. That's hundreds of tiny identity confirmations a week, invisible because they're so routine. Mark never audited them because you don't audit oxygen. So when the marriage ends, the man doesn't just lose a relationship, he loses the role his own brain had been using for 19 years as the anchor point for everything else. The job's still there, the title's still there, and it doesn't help nearly as much as he expected. Next question. When that central role vanishes, what actually happens to a man's sense of self? Most guys assume it's just grief. You feel sad for a while. You cry, maybe, or you don't. But underneath the sadness, you stays intact. Same person, just single and sadder. That's not what sociologist Helen Rose Fuchs-Ebaugh found when she studied what she called role exit. People leaving major life roles, from ex-nuns to ex-cops to divorced spouses. Ebaugh's research showed the self doesn't stay intact during a role exit. It gets reorganized, and it reorganizes around whatever roles are left standing. The problem, if one role was carrying 70% of the weight, the remaining roles, friend, coworker, gym buddy, don't have the structural capacity to absorb that load overnight. You get what Ebaugh's later work calls an identity vacuum, not sadness, a void where decisions used to make themselves. This is the cereal aisle, explained. Mark wasn't grieving in that moment. He was experiencing something closer to a system crash. For 19 years, what's for dinner was never actually his decision. It ran through a joint household identity, values he'd absorbed from being half of a we. Take away the we, and the software that used to answer that question is just gone. He's not indecisive. He's rebuilding a decision-making apparatus from scratch, standing under fluorescent lights, holding a box of Cheerios he doesn't remember picking up. The vacuum isn't permanent, but it's also not something you talk your way out of in a weekend. It has to be rebuilt, role by role, the same way it was built the first time, slowly, through repetition, not insight. So how long does this identity vacuum stick around? Most guys guess weeks. I'll bounce back once the dust settles, once the lawyers are done, once I've had a few weekends to myself. Reasonable guess. Here's that 42% again. A longitudinal study tracking divorced men published in the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage found that at the 12-month mark, a full year, 42% still scored high on what researchers term diffuse identity status, meaning not confused for a week, confused for a year, still unable to clearly answer questions about their own preferences, values, and future direction that they could have answered instantly when they were married. Mark is 6 weeks in when we catch him in that aisle. According to this data, he's not near the finish line. He's barely past the starting gun. And here's the part that compounds it. The spousal role wasn't just central, it was also the scheduler for a bunch of other roles. Who organized the dinners with the Hendersons next door? His wife. Who kept the group chat with his college buddies alive? Also her, mostly. When the marriage ends, men don't just lose the spouse role, they lose the administrative backbone that kept 2 or 3 other roles functioning. Thoits' framework predicts exactly this. Role loss rarely happens in isolation. One collapse drags others down with it, unless the man actively intervenes. Mark stopped going to Thursday basketball. Nobody uninvited him, he just quietly let it slide. The same week he let dinner slide, the same month he let a lot of things slide. Not depression exactly, contraction. His world got smaller because the thing organizing the edges of it disappeared. Now here's the twist most guys don't see coming, and it's the one that flips the whole story. You'd assume the men who suffer the worst identity collapse are the ones whose marriages were already bad. Miserable marriage, less to lose, easier landing. Makes intuitive sense. It's backwards. Reitzis and Mutran's follow-up analysis found that the men who scored highest on spousal identity salience, the ones most identified as good husbands, most invested in the role, arguably in the healthiest marriages, showed the sharpest post-divorce identity collapse, 63% versus 18%. The stronger and more central the role, the bigger the hole it leaves. It's not really about how the marriage ended. It's about how much of yourself you'd built inside it. This is why the guy everyone assumed would be fine, happy marriage, no big scandal, amicable split, is sometimes the one standing in a cereal aisle at 10 p.m., and the guy from the bitter, screaming match divorce is back on his feet in 3 months. It's not that his pain was smaller, it's that his identity was never that fused with the role to begin with. He'd already been living, psychologically, half outside the marriage. Mark's marriage, by every account, was a good one. 19 years, no affairs, no dramatic villain in the story, just 2 people who grew apart, which, by this data, made him a higher risk case for identity collapse, not a lower one. The better the husband he'd been, the more of Mark was actually stored inside that role, and the more of him went missing when the role ended. That's the part nobody warns good husbands about. Being great at the marriage is exactly what makes losing it so structurally destabilizing. So if losing one big role causes the crash, what fixes it? Ask most guys and you'll get the same answer. Get back out there. New relationship, new partner, problem solved. Rebuild what you lost with something that looks the same. It's the most common answer men give themselves. It's also, according to the same research we've been using, close to the least reliable one. Thoits didn't stop at measuring which roles matter. She tracked what happens when people rebuild after losing one. Her data shows each additional role a person actively takes on afterward correlates with roughly a 13% drop in measured psychological distress. Not one big replacement role, a portfolio of smaller ones. Coach, mentor, volunteer, regular at the same gym class. Structure rebuilt in pieces, not swapped in one trade. Mark, 4 months out, didn't get a girlfriend. He got a roster spot. His nephew's rec league needed an assistant coach. 2 nights a week, whistle around his neck, 12 10-year-olds who don't care about his divorce and give him instant, honest feedback. They either hustle back on defense or they don't. It wasn't a 5-year plan. It was one yes, said out loud, to something with zero connection to his marriage. Here's why this works when finding someone doesn't. A new role gives your brain a job today. A new relationship, if it even happens, might take a year to build enough history to carry real identity weight. Coaching gave Mark a Tuesday, then a second Tuesday, then a routine his week could organize around, the same way husband used to. Small, boring, repeatable. That's the whole mechanism. Not insight, repetition. Next obvious question. Doesn't he eventually need a partner, someone new to be a we with again, to actually finish the rebuild? It feels true. The role that collapsed was a partnered one. Surely the fix is another partnered one. The same longitudinal cohort we've been pulling from tracked identity resolution across 2 groups: men who entered a new relationship within the first year, and men who instead built out structured non-romantic roles, regular commitments with real people and real schedules. 58% of the second group showed resolved, coherent identity status by month 18. Only 22% of the new relationship first group did. The relationship didn't hurt them. It just wasn't doing the structural work they assumed it was doing. A lot of them layered a new partner on top of an identity vacuum that was still there underneath, unaddressed. That's almost verbatim from interview transcripts in this research. Men describing dating again before the vacuum was rebuilt, and finding it didn't remove the void, it just added an audience to it. Mark went on exactly 1 date in that first year. It was fine, forgettable. He didn't force a second one, not out of fear, but because he noticed something. He wasn't dating to fill Tuesday nights anymore. Tuesday nights already had a whistle in them. He was dating because he was curious, not because he was drowning. That distinction, wanting company versus needing structure, is the whole difference between the 2 percentages on that chart. So if it's not a new relationship, and it's not willpower, what actually predicts which men come out the other side fastest? Most people would guess it's about processing the past. Therapy, journaling about what went wrong, understanding the marriage. Makes sense on the surface. You'd think resolving the old story is the prerequisite for writing a new one. Psychologists Hazel Marcus and Paula Nurius built a framework decades ago called Possible Selves. The idea that identity isn't just built from your past roles, it's partly built from a specific imagined future version of you. Later applied research on major life transitions, divorce included, found something striking. People who could articulate a concrete, specific future self. Not, I'll be happier, but I'll be the guy who coaches, cooks for himself on weeknights, and takes that fishing trip he kept postponing. Resolved their identity crisis roughly 2.3 times faster than people who only process the past. Here's why. A vague future gives your brain nothing to build toward. A specific future, even a small, unglamorous one, gives it a target. The vacuum isn't just filled by adding roles in the present. It's filled faster when there's a concrete picture pulling you forward. Mark started writing 3 lines every Sunday night. Not a journal about the divorce. A short list of what next Saturday actually looks like. Coaching Tuesday, fishing Saturday, dinner with his brother sometime in there. Small, specific, boring. And, according to this research, doing more work than any amount of dwelling on what went wrong 19 years in. So here's the misconception, laid all the way out. You don't lose a marriage and stay the same man, minus a ring. You lose the load-bearing wall the rest of the house was leaning on. Peggy Thoits showed the wall was there in the first place. Roles are structural, not decorative. Reitzes and Mutran showed that wall was bigger than most men admit. Bigger for the good husbands than the bad ones. Ebaugh showed what happens in the gap after it's gone. Not sadness, a vacuum, a decision-making system rebooting from zero. And the longitudinal data showed that vacuum doesn't close in weeks. For 42% of men, it's still open a year later. The fix was never a new marriage, and it was never just time. It was small, specific, repeatable roles, added one at a time, pointed at a concrete future instead of a vague one. Mark, at the 1-year mark, the same checkpoint where 42% of men in that study were still stuck, wasn't stuck. Not because he was tougher than average, because he'd rebuilt on purpose the thing that collapsed by accident. Coaching on Tuesdays, coffee with his brother, a Sunday list, a second date he wasn't afraid of, eventually, because he wasn't asking her to be his whole identity, just company. He still remembers standing in that cereal aisle. He tells people now it wasn't really about cereal. It was the first honest question his brain had asked him in 19 years. What do you actually want? It took him most of a year to build an answer. That's not slow. According to the data, that's ahead of schedule. If this hit close to home, that's kind of the point. The error margin exists for exactly this moment, the one nobody warns you about. Head to theerrormargin.com and get on the newsletter. Every week, one misconception, torn down with the actual data behind it. No fluff, no lecture. Next episode, we're tackling the one that trips up almost every guy right after this stage. Why just get back out there is the advice most likely to set you back 6 months. That's the rebound trap. See you there.